I don't know what Silent Hill as a franchise means to you, but to me, it's something very unique, important, and, in my opinion, a genuinely profound franchise. It has almost quite literally shaped the way that I interpret, experience, and produce art. Silent Hill as a series, and more importantly, a feeling, is always there, and I'm pretty sure to at least some extent it will always be there for me. There are many imitators, but I don't think that many, if any of them, have ever recreated that feeling, and I honestly don't think it's any imitator's right to take that atmosphere of Silent Hill to be their own. When people throw out shade to the idea of another Silent Hill game, they tend to throw out reasons like, oh, it would probably be this team making it, or it wouldn't be by the same people, or were the later entries proof enough that the series should die, or any other number of reasons that I'm sure you've heard by now, or hell, even ones that you've made yourself. I think, personally, as long as it's made by a team that is passionate about the game they're making, a return to the streets of Silent Hill is an experience worth having. The atmosphere of all the mainline games is distinctly Silent Hill. Even the later games that a lot of people would rather forget exist. Like a person in your rear view mirror slowly fading away into the mist while you drive away into the sunset. But at this point in time, if you followed my channel like even a teeny little baby bit, you probably know that. I've made a total of 4 videos covering select games from both sections of the franchise. I've covered the underlying genius that I think does exist in Silent Hill 4's strangeness, the oppressive horror that Silent Hill 3 basks in. I found positives in the first post-Team Silent game, Silent Hill Origins, and I made a deep dive into what made Silent Hill 2 the most meaningful game in my meaningless life. And at this point, I think I need to even out this tipped scale of clearly biased fanboyism and look back at another game in the dreaded American Silent Hill games.
Who the fuck designed these enemies?
Silent Hill Homecoming was the first game in the series that I encountered that left me genuinely disappointed. I remember seeing all sorts of stuff leading up to its release and was there when the game stopped being known as Silent Hill 5, which was a distant foreshadowing moment where I should have realized that something was up. When it came out, I initially thought it was very good. The opening nightmare segment of the game, while not bearing 1/10 of the subtlety of even the most outrageous moments of the original games, was effective in what it was doing in terms of the series' tone. The new combat system was manageable, but I didn't hate what they were going for, and it was a new Silent Hill game, you know? Woo! But then the actual game starts, and whatever issues were there in the game that I did and did not notice, or the ones that I did or did not accept to be there at all, became slowly more and more impossible to ignore until at a certain point, I legitimately just stopped playing. Time hasn't been really that kind to Homecoming either. Even before the next mainline game in the series, people kind of treated Homecoming like it was the Phantom Menace of the franchise, in the sense that we'd all, hopefully, just look back at Homecoming as that really bad one. People trash-talked it for looking ugly as sin, its combat being god-awful, for its story completely ripping off Silent Hill 2, and also doing a weird Saw thing seemingly out of nowhere at the end. I did eventually getting around to beating it, I think around 2012. Cut to last month when I say, why not play Homecoming again for a video? So I played through it again. Was the PC port that you can get on Steam. It's god-awful, but thankfully, I was able to use a patch that helped the game, function. And to my shock and awe, it's still pretty mediocre. But I found quite a few things that I appreciated a lot in this last playthrough of Homecoming. And I want to focus on 2 of these things specifically. One being an aspect of the story that I don't really see discussed or talked about very often. And the other is something that I noticed due to the patch I had to use. Both of which recontextualized a lot of the game and kickstarted this video, which made me want to dig a little bit into the oft-forgotten grave of Silent Hill Homecoming and find the beauty that lies somewhere among its dismembered corpse. So, like I said previously, a lot of people tend to lean towards this idea that Silent Hill Homecoming, at least narratively, is a ripoff of Silent Hill 2.
Alex killed his brother and then forgot about it. Where have I heard that one before? It feels like the Silent Hill property was given to a bunch of Silent Hill 2 fans and just told to go make a game. Because they quite literally stole everything from Silent Hill 2.
This is what separates Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill Homecoming's plot twists apart. Silent Hill 2's twist did have some problems, but it was handled in a much better way than Homecoming's was.
That is, if you had never played Silent Hill 2 before. Yet we got the old James Sunderland tango to deal with here.
And while, yes, this narrative beat is a direct comparison to that of Silent Hill 2, I think by somewhat ignoring all of the other beats of the story, by dismissing it all as a simple plot of trying to find your brother, which is also something I saw a lot of people doing on YouTube, but that's besides the point, you're missing out on something actually quite ambitious, tragic, and, while not equally morbidly beautiful and poetic as Silent Hill 2, I will admit that it's kind of crazy to me that I've never really seen it discussed as a benefactor of a layer of storytelling that actually ties a lot of the game more so to Silent Hill 4 rather than 2, in terms of themes and in terms of execution. So, in Homecoming, throughout the entire game, you're looking for your missing brother, Josh. Your parents are distant, the people of the town are missing, and the few other adults that are there are found doing pretty strange and questionable things. Judge Holloway is oddly kind and seems to be ignoring a lot of the issues inside the town of Shepherd's Glen, even though things are clearly wrong, and Alex is obviously aware of this. A strange person you find digging graves in the graveyard actually turns out to be the mayor of the town, and a man that you find covered in blood and self-inflicted cuts from a scalpel is the town's physician. While I wouldn't argue that these characters are beneficial in finding your brother, what I would argue is that finding your brother isn't even the story that Homecoming is trying to tell. Silent Hill 2 is a story about guilt, trauma, and how it affects people. Now, with Homecoming, people seem to think that because of the twist ending, that all of Homecoming, by default, is just a ripoff of that story. But if you ask me, Homecoming is actually a story about salvation and redemption, and your character Alex is, in a sense, the redeemer of the guilt and trauma that plagues a lot of the main players in the game's story. And now, before I go any further, I want to say that I don't think that Homecoming's execution of this concept is bulletproof. I think that as the main character, the twist of him accidentally having killed his brother and being burdened with his own guilt and trauma somewhat skews the overall theme that I believe is here. All that being said, you may be asking by this point, how can Homecoming have more in line with Silent Hill 4? In Silent Hill 4, you spend a majority of the time not in Silent Hill, but specifically in places that are essentially the manifestations of the villain of the story, Walter Sullivan. Walter Sullivan has committed a bunch of atrocities in an attempt to cleanse the world of its sins relative to the cult of Silent Hill's beliefs. The enemies that you encounter in Silent Hill 4 are manifestations of the monsters that reside inside the mind of Walter, and the locations that you visit are like snapshots of places that he experienced throughout his tumultuous life growing up that left him the person that he is. Silent Hill 4 is about conquering the trauma and monsters that reside inside of Walter. Henry is just an unfortunate pawn that happens to stumble upon an unfortunate square apartment, seemingly imitating a losing chess piece in an unfortunate decisive move in a nail-biting game. In Homecoming, however, unlike Silent Hill 2, not all of the story beats, symbolism, and monsters are related to Alex. A lot of them are related to these other specific characters. All of these strange adults that you encounter throughout your journey were all involved in some way with the cult of Silent Hill, but in a manner of trying to keep the evil of the town from invading their little bubble of Shepherd's Glen. The only way to do that is by committing atrocities towards their children. Each of these families must kill one of their own born in a manner that is truly horrific in order to satiate the hunger of the dark power that has already infested Silent Hill. But due to Alex's actions resulting in Joshua's death revealed at the end of the game, this ritual was thrown off kilter, halting time itself, and plunged the entire town into the control of the same power. What these people did, specifically Mayor Bartlett and Dr. Fitch, has driven them essentially to variable ends of sanity. Mayor Bartlett, when you meet him, is drinking himself to near death, and like mentioned previously, Dr. Finch is completely covered in self-inflicted cuts from a scalpel. When you encounter both of these characters, you're greeted by a boss fight that immediately kills them. But what Homecoming does before each boss fight is have a conversation with these characters. Each time, you're asking about their kids, your brother, and what happened to them. Each one alludes to something tragic having happened, but it's vague enough that you can't really tell where the line between the guilt of what they've done to the town ends and the guilt of what they've done to their children and the pointlessness of having killed their child begins. What may or may not be immediately apparent to the player is that the boss fight is a manifestation of each of these characters' children and what exactly they did to satisfy the ritual. Mayor Bartlett took his son Joey, who was interested in plant life and botany, and buried him alive in the same atrium of the Grand Hotel that you find him in. You find a postcard inside of the hotel earlier in the game that alludes to this fact. I saw something strange the other night, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. I had unlocked the service doors to the atrium to let Mayor Bartlett in. I came by later to see if he needed any help, and I saw him dragging one of his bags of fertilizer inside. Only, it didn't look like any kind of fertilizer bag I've ever used. It was real heavy, and he seemed to be kinda struggling with it. Should I tell the sheriff? I don't know what to do, but I thought you should know. Dr. Finch took his daughter, Scarlett, who was fascinated by dolls, and slowly dismembered her alive. Very likely in the same patient room in the physician's office that has been modeled after Scarlett's room. These aforementioned boss fights are only triggered after Alex, the thematic redeemer for the trauma of these characters, gives the grieving surviving parents a token of their child's life. For Bartlett, it's a watch that his son wore that you find in the hotel, and for Scarlett, it's her favorite doll that you find in her manufactured bedroom. Upon seeing both of these trinkets, the world around the fathers are shaken and their guilt manifested arises. Their dead children staring them in the face in a world brought upon by their own nightmares. Judge Holloway also has a boss encounter as well, her daughter Nora, who she suffocated. But unlike the two parents before her, she feels no guilt and is under the mindset that even under the failure of the ritual, it was something that had to be done. It is also the only boss fight of these three parents that doesn't involve the death of said parent. What I'm trying to get at here is these three instances are, I think, the strongest points towards this relation to Silent Hill 4, Bartlett and Finch specifically. These encounters don't advance towards finding Josh other than essentially eliminating the possibility of uncovering information about him through these individual characters. They're simply here for a thematic purpose. They put you in the world of another victim of the town and experience their nightmare through the perspective of Alex Shepard. Both the child and the father are brought to peace through his actions, and the tenets of the power that the town has over Shepard's Glen slowly begin to fall away after each character is resolved and redeemed of their sins. While, like I said previously, this theme of salvation and redemption isn't perfect, I find there to be something truly ambitious here. If you think of Alex as the centerpiece of the story and not so much the journey of finding Josh, you come to see the story of Homecoming as Alex finding these broken parents and cleansing them and their children of the atrocities that ended their life. This theme is only further built upon when you encounter both Alex's father and mother. Both of them are suffering from the guilt of what they did to Alex growing up. And even though he wasn't sacrificed, what that means is that they spent his entire life disregarding his existence, essentially for no reason. In the chapel confessional booth, you speak to your father, and you have the option of forgiving him for the life that he gave you. It's clear that he feels regret for it and wishes that he could take it back. He wants to go knowing that his son knows that he loved him. The same also goes for Alex's mother. While she doesn't say much explicitly because it's the first parent that you meet and the game kinda actually has to keep some sort of mystery at this point, she also pleads with Alex that they didn't want to give him the life that they did. In both instances, the parent is killed either by Alex himself or the personification of Alex's grief and guilt. So all of that together, at least in my opinion, is a very ambitious thematic through line. The execution, no pun intended, is questionable, but I think that thematically it's only furthering this concept of Alex being a beacon, so to say, throughout the whole story. This thematic narrative is distinctly in tone with some of the best stories in the franchise. The subtlety used in its storytelling is bereft with symbolism and is truly tragic. Homecoming does utilize an already utilized twist ending, but it is not inherently a ripoff. There is stuff here that no other game in the series can claim to be its own, and I think that somewhere deep down under that apparent ripoff narrative, there is beauty in there. Beauty is not only skin deep, but sometimes finding that beauty on the surface is also something worthwhile. Homecoming was berated by many people for looking terrible. But when I was able to run the game for this video with that patch I mentioned earlier, I finally noticed something about Homecoming that had been right under my nose this entire time. What that patch allowed me to see within the confines of the age of Homecoming's original console limitations is the game's genuinely fantastic art direction. I was able to up-res the game to 4K, and combined with the right thumbstick allowing you to go into a first-person viewpoint, I was able to capture a lot of specific areas that seriously took a grip on my emotions and imagination, and also, in a sense, reminded me of the feelings that I got when I started playing these games in the first place. The strange feeling that I can only describe as solace through loneliness. Walking through the many locations of Silent Hill Homecoming, I was brought to mind the same feeling of isolation that one may get while looking at a liminal space. And while to most, that feeling is probably one of unease or fear, to me there is a strange longing to live inside them. To feel that emptiness on the exterior of my surroundings. It makes me think about how the world right now just seems so inevitably fucked. We wake up every day and look at the news and see threats of war, empty promises made by people in power, and we all take this negativity and throw it back onto the internet in the best way that we can and make fun of it. Our society at the moment is so desperate to feel some sort of normalcy that we've kind of resorted to not caring about what seems to be an inevitable doom. This isn't a scathe towards that type of reaction, because I partake in this age of irony to some extent. I find my best comfort zone, however, is that of a mental removal from the world altogether. Whether or not that's as healthy as a full iron-based diet, I don't know, but I think that's what's so nice about liminal spaces, and in turn, Silent Hill. I can stare at these pictures, or exist in these streets, and sort of forget. I can imagine myself in this place where it's essentially me against a world filled with nothing but the coldness of the air and the fog in my lungs. It's a world that is dangerous, but still has the allure of a haunted house where you know that the monsters can't really hurt you. You can be free to express those bottled emotions of confusion, fear, dread, and while wandering the cold streets of Silent Hill, you can just be free of everything. Because that's kind of what Silent Hill is, at least in how I see it. Homecoming's art direction really made me think of why I love Silent Hill aesthetically. It was the first next-gen game in the series, and in a sense it's a shame that it came out when it did, because this patch, up-res to 4K, I can see it for what it is. It uses a lot of iconography of the series, but it does so in such an impressive manner. Abandoned interiors like the hotel and spacious, empty outside areas such as the graveyard all give me that haunting yet voracious feeling of letting go. Silent Hill has always been beautiful to me because in a lot of my darkest moments, I could pretend that those times were my own personal hell, because in a lot of ways they were. But making that hell tangible and coming out of the other side meant that I had been cleansed. I had been purified. And I think that's why after all this time I do find such comfort in the distorted and in the off-kilter. Because I know somewhere in those images or those games, there is peace somewhere in there. No matter how empty the streets may be, or how dangerous its buildings may show themselves to you, as a player, you can let go.
Tomato is a fruit, but it's also a vegetable.
People trash talked it for looking ugly as sin, its combat being awful, for its story completely. Completely? My name's Peter Completely. Fuck, I don't know if I can do this.